Good evening and welcome to our Young Professionals Night webcast, Marketing in a Digital World with Cathy Oh. We are excited to host this timely discussion on advertising in this increasingly online world. I'm Tom Byrne, President of the Korea Society. Our guest tonight is Cathy Oh, the Global Head of Marketing and Analytics for Samsung Ads. As one of the founding members of Samsung Ads, Cathy has played a critical role in establishing the Samsung Ads brand. Since joining in 2015, Cathy has positioned Samsung as a global enterprise, overseeing efforts across the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Latin American regions. She's also a member of the Advertising Research Foundation's Women in Analytics Board, where she works to inspire and motivate women in the industry, and a marketing executive in the Ad Age Collective. Moderating tonight's webcast is CeFaan Kim, a reporter at WABC-TV Eyewitness News, who has covered many front-page breaking stories in the New York area. Prior to joining Eyewitness News, CeFaan was a reporter for News 12, Westchester, Hudson Valley. Co-chair of the Media Watch Committee on the Asian American Journalists Association, CeFaan has also reported extensively on poverty and the Asian American community in New York City. I hope you all enjoy tonight's program. Before turning it over to Cathy and CeFaan, I would like to thank and introduce also our new communications officer, Claire Callahan, and a special thanks, of course, to our IT director, Peter, who has been working tirelessly to ensure the smooth operations of all our Society webcasts, including this one, in an increasingly online world. So Peter's probably working harder than any of us at the Korea Society. And now, Cathy and CeFaan, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Tom. I'm CeFaan Kim, as you heard from Channel 7 Eyewitness News. It feels like that was a very generous introduction, but it feels like nothing matters pre-COVID, and everything I have been covering, as everyone else is seeing these days, is COVID and protests, and now the recent unfortunate surge in violence here in New York. But I'm excited to be here because, like everything else, our world's been flipped upside down. That includes advertising. And also I'm excited because Cathy Oh is a really, really big deal. So it's really awesome to have her. No, really. And it's not every day I get to hear from someone like her on issues that are complicated and, quite frankly, are rapidly evolving, even ever more so in today's upside down world of COVID. So with that, I want to bring Cathy in, and I want to at least set the context here. It's a exhaustive, I'm sure, biography, but if Cathy, you can start with just sort of how you began your meteoric rise to power, how you began your career and how you made it to here. Can you walk us through that path for us?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm flattered to be here. I'd like to thank the Korea Society for asking me to speak. And for all of you who are tuning in today, I'm honored for you to be joining me this hour. So my career, I have to say I am quite fortunate to have figured out what I love doing very early on. And that really started during my undergraduate years at Carnegie Mellon University. True story, I actually joined as a biology major. Thinking I might go the doctor route, I quickly figured out that was not going to be my passion or my future path. And I did a bit of soul searching, a lot of networking, connecting, and I identified that marketing was really my passion, the idea of storytelling. And CeFaan, I'm sure you can, attest to that as well. There is a power in being able to communicate with others and being able to tell a story, whether it's about a brand or a personal journey. So my career started off at NBC Universal. Like many of you, I'm sure, I started off with a summer internship. Before my senior year, I worked at CNBC, and I was introduced to the world of advertising sales. Many of folks think that marketing has just one note, that it's about branding and the commercial spots and the hashtags and the taglines. But in fact, there are so many different avenues of marketing. And what I was introduced to was ad sales, which is really representing the needs of advertisers that are going to be promoting their brands or services on screen. So at NBC Universal, I spent 5 years there across various properties. I started off with Bravo, went all the way through iVillage, strategic marketing, and sci-fi. And during that time, traditional TV was truly king. It was where all of the millions of dollars were spent to capture those eyeballs. But I also started to realize that, digital was becoming more and more important. believe it or not, but back then the term ad tech, it just didn't exist. When you think about the ads that are on websites today or within your apps, back then it was actually given away as bonuses or premiums to on-air purchases. So I felt like I had to get a little bit more acclimated to understanding how the digital world would evolve. So I received my master's of integrated marketing at NYU. It was really one of the first of its kind and entering the digital space, if you will. And what I loved about it is that it taught me tips and education on things that I could use in real-time marketing. From there, I transitioned over to WebMD. It may not seem like a likely choice, but I learned a tremendous amount at WebMD. Pharma was very big then, lots of dollars that were being put into advertising. But WebMD focused really on audience-based targeting. And it was one of the first of its kind where they really looked at how do we tailor our communications, our ads, our messaging based on conditions. And I will tell you, that was probably where I fell in love with product marketing, understanding different softwares and tools. And from there, I will say that everything is just about chasing the technology. I went into mobile, worked at Apple, where I led the first sales marketing organization there for advertising. I was the head of global marketing for brands and agencies. Exciting opportunity, as you probably have many questions about what the world of Apple would look like. And then chasing the next technology wave was really coming back almost full circle to smart TV, looking at connected TV and advanced TV audiences. So that's where I am today. I've been at Samsung for 5 years. As Tom noted, I am the global head of marketing and analytics at Samsung Ads. We are advanced TV advertising at scale. If I really broke down what we do, we look at connected TV and connected devices within the household and identify what are the different viewing behaviors and insights and learnings. And that's really what marketers and brands are looking for today as they look at how they're going to initiate new campaigns. So,
I want to get to connected TV because I don't think everyone fully understands what that is. But before I ask that question, I'm wondering, you've mentioned the various properties at NBC Universal, and there are so many. Did you have your feet wet in any digital properties at NBCU, or was that not until after you left NBCU?
That's a great question. So actually, my first digital experience was iVillage. NBC Universal at that time had inherited iVillage. I'm sure you're familiar with the world of the marriage of NBC and Universal. But iVillage was phenomenal at that time, really looking at what I'll call lifestyle, different pillars and channels. But my real digital combined experience with TV was at Sci-Fi. I had managed both digital and on-air properties for advertising, specifically looking at what I'll say is the .com of the day. So sci-fi.com at that time was just about booming. We had a lot of fans, and them coming to our website to learn more about the programs and thinking about additional content and sponsorships. I still can't believe that at a certain point, those digital ads were just not being monetized in the most effective way. There weren't as much insights or learnings against it, not like the way it is today.
There are still some gaps though, right? I mean, in terms of like not monetizing. I mean, I'll give you an example. I subscribe to YouTube TV and I'll be watching ESPN, and then you see what we call in your business, right? A local pod that just goes unused, like real estate that's vacant, that isn't really being, I guess, used in its greatest capacity. I mean, let me get to that sort of in a backward way. Connected TV. I'm not sure that everyone here knows what connected TV is. Can you first explain what that means, and then what it means in the world of advertising, and then tie that all into how, I guess, you talk about monetizing, right? You might fill those gaps, I hope, through connected TV. Can you explain that for us?
Absolutely. So I'll take one step back, which is, connected TV, usually the acronym CTV, is actually referred to from a research standpoint as any TV that is made smart or Wi-Fi connected. Now, when you look at our smart TV world, there's the hardware side, which is Samsung. We have across over 50 million smart TVs in the US. There's also other devices that make a TV smart, quote unquote, such as Roku or an Amazon Fire Stick. And what these connected TVs allow us to do is really identify the viewing behavior. So imagine if you're on your smart TV and you're an avid Netflix user or Hulu user. We'll be able to identify the number of times and frequency of use of that app, but not necessarily what is viewed within the app. But also think of it from a linear standpoint. If I'm tuned into ABC and I'm watching your program, we can identify how many of our 50 million TVs have actually tuned into that program, and also when they were able to turn it off. You know, one of the things that gets so exciting about connected TV and advanced TV landscape is that, you know, we're able to tell so much more about the viewing behavior. That's inclusive of linear viewing, OTT viewing, which is over the top. So think of all the apps that are embedded into your TV or your Roku or Fire Stick, as well as what you're doing in terms of streaming or other connected devices that are attached to the TV. Yeah.
This sounds like Samsung is cutting out the middleman, being, let's say, Nielsen, right? Is that fair to make that analogy?
A very good question. So for many of the folks on the phone who are tuned in, who may not know what Nielsen is a measurement company. They have been around for decades and have been traditional, what I'll call metric measurement in the TV space. You know, our goal is not to cut out Nielsen or the middleman, but it absolutely does show a different lens, if you will, of smart TV viewing. One of the things that we are, you know, that we hold quite dear to us is the privacy of customers. So we do ensure that, you know, consumers are able to opt out of certain ad personalization. We also ensure that the behavior that's happening on the TV alone is not just enough. We have to think about what does that mean in the context of that household? What are other devices like your mobile device or your laptop also being able to view? From an advertiser lens, one thing that I can share with you that has been wildly successful and very much needed is that when we spend millions of dollars on the TV, buying a spot, there's really no way to capture exactly how many people were actively viewing that. When I say actively, meaning sitting directly in front of your TV and absorbing it, right? There's been many different methods through surveying and through panel measurement as well. But we have the ability to identify of those TVs that were turned off or not viewed, how can we reach them? So we find ways to reach them through other natural ways of behavior, if you will. So whether it's on a mobile device or on your laptop. I think the point that I try to explain to our partners and advertisers is that Samsung Ads is really here to provide another way to look at measurement and viewing behavior. And we're really looking to make all of our media plans and campaigns smarter. So that way marketers and brands can learn from those measurements, identify if they've reached the right audience, and more importantly, you know, try to understand like what was the result from that? What's the ROI that they're getting back? Yeah.
So I think everyone, I would hope at this point, is up to speed with, you know, Google, Facebook, and then how all these companies monetize. It's obvious why the data is gold, essentially, right? It's worth so much. I guess my question to you is, how then does Samsung monetize that data?
So one of the things that we've decided early on, and you know, I've been at Samsung Ads for 5 years. In our early days, we were just about 5 people starting a business, but we did recognize, to your point, the data is king, it's gold. And every time that we're building more devices and adding to that number, the data just gets richer. So we made a very clear and conscious decision that we do not sell our data. Data is not for sale. We do not monetize specifically on that data. And that is also to protect the consumer privacy as well. But what we do is that we marry that insights based on targeting and ability to reach those audiences, especially for customers who do partner with us and are able to advertise on our TVs. We're able to give them a level of what I'll call learnings and insights. I think it's important to recognize that data is really the new oil, right? It's the new monetization currency, if you will. And we've been very protective of that. And I think for rightful reasons, as you've probably seen in the news and other companies and how they manage.
Let's backtrack a little bit. It took a whole lot of work and effort on your part to get to this point, to talk about this initiative. You were one of the first Samsung Ads team members 5 years ago. And obviously today it's hundreds of employees across countries across the world. What is it like to scale an organization to that level?
Well, you know, it's incredible to think that it's been 5 years. This is actually our 5th year anniversary, which, you know, compared to other companies, we're still very young. But, you know, I mentioned before that we were a team of 5. I like to consider us kind of the original, I'll call it the OG of Samsung Ads, if you will. It was so much so that if we were invited to a client meeting, the entire company, all 5 of us went. But now we are globally expanded across North America, LATAM, APAC, and EMEA. I will say that, you know, over 500 plus employees for Samsung Ads. When I think about that journey, there's a few things that come to mind. And I think that those who are in a startup world will absolutely understand and relate to it. Those who have an entrepreneurial spirit will also reflect on it as well, which is you have to build this organization as if it is going to be around for the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 plus years. And that comes down to everything from thinking about your positioning. What do you want to be in the marketplace? How do you want to ensure that your tone is being consistently represented, whether you're in Germany versus the US or in Korea? Another aspect that is very dear to my heart is the community culture. Our corporate culture is really what defines us and separates Samsung Ads, in my opinion, to any other organization that I've worked with. It's that ability to hire talent where people are willing to roll up their sleeves, to go above and beyond, who are looking to really solve problems. And, that's one thing that I'm very proud of. This whole crawl, walk, run approach has actually boded in our favor.
Interesting. I have a curious question for you about corporate culture. You mentioned that we're talking about a global company. Cultures across the world are not the same. Corporate culture is not the same. In particular, Samsung, a Korean company. South Korea doesn't do corporate culture the same way we do. What are some of the most fascinating things that you've noticed in terms of differences and similarities as you scale a company across so many different cultures?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So I actually had an opportunity to oversee a global organization, both at Apple and at Samsung. I get this question a lot of, more specifically, what were the differences of Apple and Samsung? I won't go into that route too much. But in managing a global organization, I think there's a factor that needs to be recognized, which is that there is a company culture that has to live and resonate across very different countries and regions. Each country has its own culture, has its own language even. And there's also very different working relationships that are established there. One of the things that I like to continue to highlight to my team is that we truly have to first and foremost focus on our customers. And our customers may vary, obviously, based on where they are from and what type of dynamic even the economy may be in at that time. But if you focus on the customer's needs and really listen at what is their top 5 problems. And you may not be able to solve all 5, but if you can solve 1 or 2 out of 5 of those, that's where long-lasting partnerships and relationships really do last.
That sounds like a piece of really good advice that people should be writing down right now. I would write that down. Okay, so aside from the 9 to 5, obviously, I think it's safe to say that what I find the most successful people have in common is they're passionate about something that ties us all in. That may not all be related to your 9 to 5. In this case, you're very involved in women's initiatives. You started one within Samsung Ads. Can you tell us about that and why you did it and how that all turned out?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, I would say that my passion for women's initiatives probably started well before Samsung, almost in my early career. Where I am today is not by my own doing. It's certainly, I can list dozens of women who have helped me get to this point. And, when you focus specifically on, let's say, the ad tech or digital economy, it's only 24% of the jobs that are occupied by women. And while that number and that percentage has ticked up and we've been doing a good job, I do feel like there is a due diligence that is required in terms of being able to give back. I can tell you that when I look at the way that digital innovation is trending, where it's moving, it certainly cannot be developed only by men's experiences. It has to be the combination of women and men, which is why I think it's incredibly important for us to find ways to provide opportunities for women to have leadership roles. I think it's important to mentor and to be a mentee, and then finding ways to elevate women. Whether it's on a project that you're specifically working on or giving them an opportunity to speak during a meeting in front of your organization, I think those are opportunities that are stepping stones for giving women the confidence to really step up, to have a seat at the table, if you will. And, I will tell you, I am fascinated by the amount of energy and passion that Samsung has shown around this women's initiative. It's called Women Plus. It's actually a Women Plus sign. It's important that we called it that because we did want to recognize that women are so much more. We are Women Plus mothers, caretakers, passionate enthusiasts. And we're tapping into not just the women community at Samsung, it's actually inclusive of men as well. I'll give you one example. Earlier today, we hosted a women committee leads meeting. It was the first of its kind where we identified different leadership members across 4 pillars. First being partnership and events, diversity and inclusion, governance, as well as communications. And in that group of leaders, if you will, we do have 2 gentlemen who have raised their hands, who are passionate about it. And hearing their story of why representing women in a pretty male-dominant corporation and industry, if you will, was really heartening. And I thought it was just very uplifting to see that this is not just a journey for women alone, but we can find allies with our male colleagues as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned the word mentorship and mentor, because I was going there. It's almost like you know where I'm going. It's almost like I've done an interview before like this. I oftentimes say, and to the young professionals who hopefully are watching this, that you never get there alone. Everyone, another common theme I find among successful folks is that they had a good mentor. So what I want to ask you, if you can share with the audience here, is what would you describe as a good mentor? What should someone look for? What should a young person look for in a good mentor? And how do you serve as a mentor? What do you try to pass on to the younger folks?
It's a great question. You know, I have had the opportunity to mentor several women and men. I've also very much learned and grew from other mentors of mine. Here's one of the things that I can share. As a mentor, I do think it's your responsibility to give the right amount of time. It's one thing that most probably don't recognize, which is you can be a mentor, but it's important to be a consistent mentor, to do that check-in. So I will say there have been times where I actually did have to apologize if in that given moment I wasn't able to give the appropriate time. But that level of relationship and being able to grow and understand each other and to be able to really like what are the areas that they not only need to expand on, but where can I tap into their passion areas, right? As a mentor, I think listening is important. I will say that finding ways to provide networking, which normally they may not have had access to, is important. I have many occasions been able to introduce my mentees either to other mentors or even future job opportunities. You know, as a mentee, one of the things that I give guidance on is that I do think it's important for you to lean in as well. So lean in, don't be shy, you know, ask someone to mentor you, but be clear in explaining why, right? What is it that you want to learn and what is it that you're trying to solve for? I think when you can really pinpoint at least 1 or 2 areas where a mentor can help you, that's where you're going to really develop a very nice relationship that's going to lead towards growth.
I love the first thing you said about being available, because, you know, crisis kind of happens unscheduled, right?
Yes.
And a mentee could be in need and you don't plan that. And when they need you in that moment, that's when you need to be there, I guess. So that's a really good point. I would like to add that, you know, I had several good mentors in my life. And I always say that a mentor is somebody who will mentor you even if your best interests are in conflict or at odds with their best interest. In other words, I've had mentors that helped me, even if it meant them losing a job, right? I think young folks sometimes forget that there are folks that it's to their benefit to recruit and groom you, and that doesn't always mean you're a mentor. That's kind of their job, right? There's a difference. So just throwing that out there. We're on this issue of women's initiatives. We can't ignore the fact, and you've mentioned it already, that you know you worked in a male-dominant field. We can't ignore the fact that we're witnessing perhaps a civil rights movement of our generation, highlighting inequalities, whether that be economic or racial or gender. So as a woman of color, I have to ask you as a journalist, I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't ask you the kind of barriers that you overcame. And if you can share with us some of those successes so that anyone else who may face those same barriers might have some guidance going forward.
Yeah, sure. You know, it's so important to not be tone deaf, especially today in the world where I think everyone is at a reflection point. You know, I thought about this question because I imagined it would come up. And it was interesting because I could almost segment my career or my journey into 3 periods, if you will. And the type of instances or challenges evolved over time. You know, when I first started my career, and I was junior, I was considered to be the rookie. I didn't realize back then the amount of unconscious bias that I had received. You know, I'll give you a perfect example. I remember there were multiple occasions where my boss or my manager at that time would say, "Oh, don't worry, you know, we have the numbers. I got an Asian girl on my team." And, as a young junior girl, you felt kind of flattered. You felt like, oh, I can do the job. I'll be the one who's going to, help solve it. I'm getting kind of like the gold star. But when you reflect back onto it, the color of your skin and the unconscious bias that, lies in some comments like that, it's not okay. It's not okay in today's society. It's not acceptable in today's corporation or in company.
Yep.
I will add that not only as a woman, but a woman of color, but also as typically a younger woman in a leadership team, has really given me a lot of what I'll call an eye-opening experiences. Here's one given guidance that I would give to many young professionals, but also those who are not young professionals who are in your careers now. I think that this is the time that we have the opportunity to address any type of unconscious bias. And I do believe very strongly there is always a tactful way to get your point across.
Yeah.
I will also say that I look at it as an opportunity to address ignorance. I think that it's very common for us to walk away from any comments or any slights that would feel offensive, or you would feel frustrated or even angry. But if you can channel that into an energy where you can address it and educate, I think that we're all going to try to help with a systemic change on how we can be more inclusive of our diverse culture.
I'm not going to go really deep here now, because I've been thinking about something these past few months, and I'd love to hear your take on this. But let me sort of give you an example from my side, right? I arrived at WABC-TV, the number one station in the number one market. It's like, where everyone wants to end up, about 5 years ago. And before I landed here, I'd interviewed with countless news directors, agents, speech coaches, and I can't tell you how many of them, not the one that hired me here, would ask me this sort of coded, unconscious bias question, which was, is English your first language? Or where's your accent from? Mm-hmm. And I'm born and raised in America. I would argue that I don't have an accent. Mm-hmm. And I knew to be offended by that, by the way. It wasn't like I didn't know, but I also kind of accepted this as, well, when you do something for the first time, they're first Korean male, very few Asian men, and you're different, people are not used to it, right? So they ask things that they might not know, maybe inappropriate. So what I've been asking myself, and this is where I'm going to get deep, is I wonder now, with the current movement, would I have or should I have responded differently? I'm applying this not to yourself, but even in general. Mm-hmm. Are we in a different moment now where your answer for this question a year ago might be different if you heard that same barrier question today? Have things changed that much?
Great question. I tend to be a bit more on the optimistic side. I do think that things have changed, but I also believe that we need a lot more change. So that's a bit of a generic answer, so I'll dig deeper as well.
Okay.
When I think about moments across my different career moments, but I will say that it's not just within my careers, within other associations, organizations, sometimes even amongst meeting friends, right, for the first time. There are moments where I'm sure everyone has felt this at one point. You hear something, it doesn't sound right. You go home later and you wish you said something.
Yep.
And the thing that I feel so powerful about in today's current age is that I think that we have given ourselves the permission to say that it's not okay. And I think that is done through seeing others stand up. I have absolutely been completely inspired by other members in the organization, whether it's at Samsung Ads or within, I am on the board of KCF, and I like to see the level of diversity and inclusion that happens there as well. I think that we're starting to find our voice. And the thing that I would notice, in those moments where I kicked myself for not saying something, I don't actually am regretful of it. I just realized that at that time, I think that the society was not really open and welcome to it. And of course, there was fear, there was apprehension behind it. But when you realize, look at our community. I mean, the Korean American community is so multifaceted at this point. We are not just in the doctor and finance fields. We're in news, we're in media, we're in advertising. We have branched out into the culinary world, into hospitality. I mean, when you see the level of Korean Americans who are leading in their various fields, I find it really empowering, to be quite honest. What I would love to see more of is Korean Americans in politics. I'd love to see them in DC. And I think that's really a moment that we would all be very proud of, and a moment where we would be able to fully represent ourselves from a systemic standpoint.
Well, I think that's happening slowly. If I can, having covered this city for 20 years now, what I have noticed is, Koreans got here a little bit later than, let's say, Chinatown was established much sooner. But I am noticing optimistically, particularly in Northern Jersey, by the way, where a lot of the Koreans have moved to, where the schools are great. They're very actively involved in politics. So hopefully that's the next step. I'm with you on that one. Let's talk about sort of broader how to be, this megastar like you became. How do we get there? A lot of leaders say that failing versus succeeding, you can learn more from failure. I guess the question is, do you prescribe to that ideology? And if so, is there a failure that you can think about specifically that you felt that you really learned a lot from or grew from?
Sure. I actually don't feel that you learn more from failures versus successes. I think you can learn from both, actually. But I absolutely had some failed moments. I mean, I cringe even thinking about it, to be quite honest. But there's one in particular. Actually, I'll say there's two in particular that come to mind. The first is something that I go back to quite often. When I was at Apple, I was leading a marketing team at that time, and my internal customers, if you will, was a sales organization. And a big part of my job was to basically identify sellable packages or solutions that they can go out and bring to their clients. Apple was such an inspiring and interesting environment. It really did teach me the intersection of perfection as well as the timeliness of getting things to market. I remember at that time, I was so focused. It was almost like a tunnel vision on perfecting exactly what we needed to bring to our sales team. And in fact, I missed the whole point of asking them, what do you think is going to be desired by our customers? What do you think is needed? What do you need? And it really represented kind of, I would say probably a lot of people's failed points, which is at times you focus so much on what you think is supposed to be the appropriate way, when in fact the answer is staring right at you in the face. You just have to ask, how can I help? So I've been very fortunate to learn that lesson, because very much so now, I think we're in a day and age where it's not just about what you think. You do really need to tap into the pulse of the community, of the economy, of the industry in itself, and understand what are your challenges that we can help surface. So that's one professional failure. I'll share with you a personal one. A few years ago, quite a few years ago actually, I sat on a panel. It was myself along with four other gentlemen. And the panel was very much similar to this, a conversation about your field and your career. At the end, there was a Q&A, and there was a woman who had stood up and said, look, you are the only woman sitting here amongst the men in the panel. What were some of the challenges that you faced as a woman getting to this point? And my sister will remember this because she was in the audience as well. I gave a response that was not representative of me, and it wasn't representative of the women of color who are in this industry, which is that in fact there are challenges. There are points where your race does become a conflict. There are points of unconscious bias that you face on a daily basis. And in fact, I gave a very polished response saying that, you just have to focus on your job and work on what you, and that was perhaps a really defining moment for me, because, especially for the Korean and Asian American community, I think we're taught that if you work really hard, you keep your head down and you just become a most diligent worker, success will follow. And that's not true. It's just not true. I believe that you need to work hard and you have to be passionate with what you do, but you also need to work smart. And working smart is also networking. It's addressing problems that, may impact the business. It's also working with your manager to figure out exactly what am I going to do that's going to make my manager or my team's life easier.
What if you could have a do-over? What would you have said in that moment instead?
I would have said that, and keep in mind this was like 2007 or so. So it was in a day and age where I don't think unconscious bias was even a recognized term at that time.
Right.
I would have said to her that there absolutely have been challenges. So, I know that this is a virtual meeting here. Not only am I a woman of color, I was one of the youngest members and still am of any leadership team. I'm also small in stature. So this is all the combinations of things that you feel. I would have told her that in those moments, you need to learn to speak up. You need to be part of that conversation, not on the sidelines. And I do think it's important to say that, you know, it's one thing to be able to lean in and speak up. You need to find a way to sit at the table and join the conversation. And that can't just be done by yourself. Sometimes that is going to be done through allyship, finding allyship, which is really identifying different members across the organization to find that level of relationship and support. Finding your advocates in the organization. How do you ensure that your work is being spotlighted? And, you know, one of the things that I work on quite often with my team is that, you know, many folks love to work really hard. They're very proud of the work that they do. They're shy when it comes to self-promoting it. And that's where I say you have to self-promote yourself as much as I would self-promote you. So you need to be able to advocate for your own growth. You have to be able to spotlight the work that you do and feel really confident in that. The work that you did is actually exemplary, and also recognize those who have helped you to that point as well.
I want to get a little more specific on the challenges, because you did talk about how to overcome them. Full disclosure, since you're being intimate here, you are friends with my wife, who in a previous life worked in the same industry, is also at the time, not that she's not young, but was younger, Korean, and small. And one of the things that she would tell me, and I'm curious if you agree with this, is that the challenge overall that she faced was this perception of being this small, young Asian girl. Mm-hmm. And the result of it was oftentimes she was just sort of overlooked and dismissed. Mm-hmm. Would you agree that that is sort of the general challenge that you would face as a woman of color in your industry?
Absolutely. I mean, overlooked is one aspect. I would say sometimes being misconstrued as an intern, or yes, that has come up quite often. I will tell you that more recently, even in my level and position, I've actually have been biased based on my age. You know, almost saying that, you know, you have plenty of time, or, you know, sometimes it turns into all of a sudden your marital status. Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you not? Right. So, you know, it's all of these.
Which is none of their business, by the way.
None of their business. Absolutely. Right. So, you know, it's all these factors that, you know, and here's one thing that I will say. I do recognize that women face various challenges, right? I will also say that this goes to men as well. This is me being in full equality. I don't think that this is just to women, but answering your specific question, because I do love your wife and I feel her, I'm empathetic because I feel the same experiences. I have absolutely had moments where I think it was expected for me to be quiet, for me to sit on the sidelines and take notes, to work late hours, and basically just do whatever is asked. Don't ask questions, don't challenge. And it's funny, the moment that you do bring up a point, not a challenge, bring up a point, it's perceived as you're being aggressive or too confident or too challenging. And this is where I would say to all women, you should not fear that. I think that everyone has a voice, you have your own thoughts. I actually would love to encourage managers, both men and women, to encourage vocal discussion, because you know, it's the opportunity that you give to ask questions. You know, I think oftentimes in team meetings, someone says, oh, does anyone have a question? It's very general. Then it all of a sudden becomes your own personal burden of, should I say something or should I not? But if you ask a question directly to, let's say, CeFaan, I want to hear your thoughts. It gives that window an opportunity to, you know, hear their voice and be more inclusive.
Again, it's almost like if you read my mind, or if I've done interviews before, because the next question is sort of, you've kind of answered it, but it's about how you can be a good manager. And let me start with the news side, because this is sort of my take, and maybe it applies to other industries, maybe not. I'm curious. I like to say a good manager, because in the news business, it can be sometimes so subjective, what the right call was, what the wrong call was. Mm-hmm. And I always say a good manager is someone who can make the decision and live and die with it, meaning if it's wrong, you can own it. And I feel like your subordinates respect you more when you can own a mistake, as long as you can defend it and justify it. That's just my take. I'm curious what you would add to that as far as what would be a good management style.
Sure. Well, if my team is tuned into this right now, which I think some of them are, they know that I am fully transparent. As I say, what you see is what you get. I will tell you, one of the best lessons that I've learned as being a manager is that if you want your team to really excel and perform at their best, you have to help them get to that point. And what that means is sometimes it's recognizing their strengths. It's recognizing passion points that make them even perform better, but it's also giving them a little bit of what I'll call tough love. At the end of the day, I want my team to succeed. If I can spotlight them, if I can see them get accolades and recognition within the organization, at the end of the day, my job is done. I will also say that as a manager, I do think it's important to showcase that working hard is not just for, the members below you or members on your team. I work as hard as them. And I think that type of work ethic is really important. One of the things I personally love is being able to collaborate with each of them. It's hard sometimes when you have 40, 50 plus members on your team. So being able to connect with them one-on-one is something that I really pride myself in able to do as well.
Sticking on the mentorship topic, for me at least personally, I feel like one of the most important mentors in my life told me at an age when I was too young to even see this, to always balance your personal and work life, because that ultimately is what makes it happy in the end, right? You don't always see that when you're 21 years old.
Sure.
But I'm curious, what advice would you give to young folks who, right now they're going 100 miles an hour thinking about career, and that's great. But at the end of the day, like, there's a balance, right? And I wonder, what would you say to them about how you manage all that in your life as you climb the ladder higher, and you begin to have a family perhaps, and you have to juggle these things? It's not easy. What would you say to them?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I think those who do know me, and I have some colleagues of mine that may be watching this as well, very much so in my 20s, I was a workaholic. I would say that I probably failed at the work-life balance. And one of the things that I've learned is that the work-life balance isn't just about your sanity. It's not about being able to have less stress and being able to have a balance in life. It actually does bring out the best in you in both worlds. Yep. Being able to be more well-rounded and to be able to be exposed to things outside of your day job, right? Which may sometimes feel like a 24/7 job, right? It's actually going to give you a different perspective. It gives you exposure to different creativity, different ideas. And I personally I know that we're in the virtual age right now, but networking is still my primary go-to in terms of being able to understand what else is happening in this industry, whether it's in my own or somewhere else. Yeah,
that's really good advice. To young people who are getting started, I mean, I've heard this thrown out by other mentors before, and I wonder if you also prescribe to it. It sort of goes like this: the harder you work when you're young, the sooner you can rest when you're older. Does that resonate? Like, can you unpack that? Does that make sense?
I wish that was true. Then I wish that was true. Here's what I would say. I think the work is different. When you're younger, I was there too. I was actually, CeFaan, you're going to appreciate this. I still remember the days when I was putting in the beta tape. So for those of you guys who don't know what tape is, please Google it. It's massive. Right. But I would put in a beta tape, and now I would watch hours and hours and just count the number of times the sponsor name was. So the point is, I built myself ground up, right? You put in the time to do some of the work, because foundationally you are really learning the business or the trade or whatever expertise that you're in. But soon that work transfers into something else, which is then thinking about how to be strategic. My day-to-day and my life with my team is always thinking 2 or 3 quarters out. That doesn't happen overnight. You need to have all the skill sets in place to be able to think about, 2, 3 quarters out. How do you ensure that the roadmap and plan that you're putting forward is going to be executed in the most prominent way? And here's what I would say, as a manager, I've heard oftentimes through panels and other Q&As, a lot of young professionals say, well, as a manager, is it really that much work, or does it get easier? I would say it gets harder. It does. It gets harder, but it is very fulfilling. I will tell you that it's very fulfilling. For me personally, I love working with a team that is so energized. I actually get fueled by it. I love seeing how a team comes together and they really grow. And then when you think back and think about all the ways that we've, implemented these new initiatives, these new ideas together, I'm growing from them as much as they're growing from me as well.
Follow-up question here, because you said managing is harder, and I actually believe that. And here's my theory, and I'm not a manager, so I'm curious what you have to say. This is like a nice little chat, right? We're just having a little fireside chat.
Yep.
In my line of work, I like to say that I'm in a profession where it's sort of like forced human-to-human interaction, if that makes sense, right? Whether you're a police officer or a doctor, a journalist, my day is not behind a desk. It's not at a computer. It's speaking to people. Mm-hmm. And what you find when you talk to people is people are very different. You see sort of like the best in humanity, the absolute worst sometimes, at least in my line of work. And I wonder if being a manager is tougher because it involves managing people, and people and human relationships are some of the most important and fragile at the same time, and also the hardest to really maintain and build into strength. Is that a fair sort of theory?
It's not just theory, it's absolute fact. One of the things that I will say is if you were to see me as a manager 10 years ago, I have moments where I've definitely recognized that I was not at my best. And what I mean by that is sometimes as a young manager, you're just focused on getting the job done. Right. So what you're basically doing is you're creating pressure, and right. You're ensuring that your team is cranking as hard as you are, which right. doesn't really speak to the value of growing and being able to invest in your team. Right. As a people manager right now, it's very complex. I won't lie. It's not just about dealing with all of the different sensitivities and acknowledgments of what's happening in our society today, but it's also understanding one-on-one. It's a relationship. So being able to find how much can you push, how much can you inspire. I will tell you, my rule of thumb though is to always be honest. My team knows this, and I've said this before. When you come into a performance review, you should not be surprised by the feedback that you're going to receive, because a good manager would actually give you feedback along the way. It's not at the end of the year, it's not halfway through. There's always a teachable moment, and I don't mean that to my team. I'm talking about for myself as well.
A good manager, you shouldn't be surprised by the feedback. Write that one down. That sounds like, get that. No, but I understand it though, right? Understanding people is complicated. I want to kind of end full circle where we started, right? We were kind of getting nitty-gritty of the industry, and I want to kind of veer back and close on that. And there's so much to get into. We talked about cord cutting and the future of TV and advertising. So I have sort of this counterpoint, if you will, and then maybe some parts of it you may agree with, maybe some parts of it you won't. But I always make the argument that, first we know, at least in television, even though there are eyeballs that have gone to digital, the revenue, at least for the most part, has remained on the broadcast TV side. And I used to always argue that even if it goes digital, which it's going that way, the gatekeepers remain the same, right? Whether it be Disney, ABC, or NBCU, or CBS Viacom, or Netflix, they're not going anywhere. They just buy up these digital platforms, and all we see is digital outlets and platforms failing every day, and yet these big, television corporations don't go anywhere. I'm wondering if you think that, because this is something I've heard quite a bit in the past 4 months, that COVID has kind of reinforced television, aside from the obvious where this moment is sort of built for TV and getting information. I wonder if you think, and I'm hearing that like advertising money has shifted back towards television because that's where the eyeballs are. I wonder where you see this heading. Did this moment sort of change the trajectory, or is it still going the way you think it was before all this?
No, it's a great question, and such a good one. There's so much that I can unpack here. I'll start with my first point, which is, it's not about TV that's going away, because I don't actually believe in that. And we've actually seen in the numbers that TV is not going away. I want to just clarify one thing. Content is king right now. Right. It's content. Right. It's not about the networks or the producers. It's about the content itself. And as you know, content lives everywhere. So even ABC or NBC, if you look at the 5 big conglomerates of the TV and cable networks, their content lives across multiple different properties. What we've been seeing across viewership trends is that, linear is not going away. And linear, by that, I should explain, is traditional TV. Right. I know that if anything, there was maybe even an article a year or 2 years ago in the Times saying that, linear TV is dying, it's going to be abolished soon. I don't believe in that. However,
Might just show it's not dying. I mean,
no, it's not. Especially if you
numbers,
think about live programs and viewing, and also just thinking about how to shift traditional viewing behavior. That's going to take some decades there. But what we are seeing is that there's different formats that are being viewed, right? So streaming is absolutely on the rise, especially in light of social distancing and quarantining and staying at home recently. We've seen that there's been over 130% increase in streaming alone. And a lot of those streamings, if you really break it down, there's OTT, which is over the top apps. And within there, there's AVOD, which is advertising video on demand, a lot of acronyms. There's SVOD, which is subscription-based video on demand. So think of the Netflix subscriptions or the Hulu subscription. What we are seeing is that advertising video on demand is increasing. And I think for that is because oftentimes AVOD platforms are free. So Samsung ourselves, we have our own AVOD platform called Samsung TV Plus. Has a multitude of channels within there that are absolutely free for viewing if you have a smart TV. But within there, what we do have are ads that you may see very similar to linear viewing behavior.
I think it's specific then. So because, you know, OTT, this is the thing, right? I mean, so I'm going to plug my own, you know, bosses here. Disney Plus is out there. To your point, content is king, whether it be Marvel or Pixar, you name it, they own Star Wars, right? So what I'm wondering is, you know, ABC News, for instance, you know, it's traditional TV. Are we heading to a world where that can only be viewed on OTT? Like, are we heading to a world where, okay, traditional TV in terms of the content creators still exists, but will it be only available on Disney Plus one day? Is that where the ad money's going?
That's so interesting. You know, I always say this, the ad money follows consumers' viewing behavior or consumers, period. Here's the thing, at the end of the day, it's going to be defined by how consumers are adapting to technology. If you think about it, thoughts of watching a program directly on your mobile phone would not have been the case 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
As viewers, or I should say consumers, were using their phone and devices for multitude of things beyond just content viewing, it became kind of their go-to device. When I think about viewing behavior today across consumers, the thing that I have learned that it will always remain true is that content viewing is agnostic of what platform you're using. It could be done on your TV, move to your laptop, to your tablet, your device. And, you know, while I can't predict the future of exactly where, let's say in this case, ABC will be putting all news content, I think it's going to follow where the eyeballs are. And that's typically where the ad dollars will follow as well.
Interesting. Okay. And do you think that the moment, I think you may have answered it, but you think the moment, because the habits have changed, and this, let's be clear, we think that this moment could last for several years now. That's going to create all new habits that are going to hard to go backwards on. I mean, is that sort of the calculation here in the industry, is that, you know, we're forced into evolution, if you will, and now we're creating new habits. And then, it's, as we all know, habits are hard to break. Is that sort of what we see on the other side of this thing?
You know, it'll be interesting because, well, the short answer is yes. I think that there's going to be a natural evolution that consumers are going to have to follow, honestly, based on the situation that we're in currently today, which is that we are still just slowly starting to reopen, right? We are still seeing that there are spikes that are happening across the world. But what does that mean from a work from home or, you know, social distancing standpoint? The question that I would pose right back to you, and really more just a rhetorical question, is, you know, what does that mean from a content production standpoint? That's what I wonder about. You know, as we look at content production slowing down, live sports harder to do without an audience, right? Us finding ways to adapt to different series as well as different cable networks than what we're seeing. I would be curious what that looks like. And I'll add one more layer to that, which is the type of content. So now we've got TikTok videos out there, we got Insta stories. I mean, the content could not get any shorter. You think about that really from, you know, where's our consumers' attention span, right? And what's considered too long, right? Is this, you know, 30-minute episodic program, is that too long? Should we make it 19 minutes now? So I've been having a lot of fun trying to keep up with the trends on seeing how producers are going to think about different content formats.
That's a really interesting question you raised, because we have been struggling with that ourselves. Obviously in news, we keep it tight and short, but Netflix has sort of proven that, to the point you made earlier, the content is the king. If it's a good content, people will sit there for an hour or 2 hours. It's not always about short attention spans. I think that's sort of a misperception of our culture, if you will, right? They just want good content, and they'll make the time for an hour or 2 hour documentary, for instance, whether it be on, you know, a streaming service or not. Okay, I want to ask you one other question. Running out of time, like timed that well, right?
Sure.
I'm just fascinated by this, right? It's almost my own curiosity because, you know, you're talking about a global company, and we touched on this earlier that it goes across so many different cultures. We tied it into the habits. We talked about the habits that you're seeing here. What are some of the different places that Samsung Ads is in that you're seeing entirely different habits, perhaps? I mean, even in South Korea, for instance, the way they consume media is not the same as they do here, right?
Wildly different. I'll look at it just even purely from the lens of, let's say, the U.S. versus UK. It really is. I will say there's multifacets that go into it. It's based on the introduction of technology to start with in any country that you go to. It's also dependent on content, again, where it's going to be distributed, if you will, and all of that is done through multiple business development deals that are happening behind the scenes. But you also think about a consumer behavior standpoint, right? While Americans may think that we are very tech advanced and forward, Korea is light years ahead. And one of the things that we're recognizing is that there are a lot of different behaviors, not just even in terms of viewing, but also what are you doing at that time while you're viewing that content. So I would say about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a whole boom in the ad industry talking about what is co-viewing. So you're doing something on the TV, but you're also on the phone. And what does that behavior look like? Well, think about that times 3 or 4 other devices now. And also thinking about, TV oftentimes, especially in Asian markets, are very much to showcase different brands and products. What does that do from an e-commerce standpoint? It's been really interesting to see the different trends in Korea as well as Asia compared to here in the US.
And here's a follow-up question I just came up with. So you just touched on that it starts with the base of the technology in that country. That being said, I'd like to sort of weave some of these topics that we talked about together. Our access, or I guess in this case, compared to a country like South Korea, which is the most wired country in the world, like literally, I was watching grandfathers watch HD streaming baseball games on the subway, right? Where here you would never have that. The question is our inability to access Wi-Fi, for instance, in this country, tying this into a previous theme, is that part of inequality that we are now sort of struggling with? I mean, this moment has sort of exposed all kinds of inequalities. Obviously, COVID presented us with lack of access to healthcare in certain places. Is the lack of access to technology part of the mix in this conversation, in your opinion?
I think it is. This may not be a complete apples to apples match, but I'll give you an example. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, we were actually the first campus to have Wi-Fi. And it's just coming up, I'm just thinking of this, but the access to Wi-Fi on your great lawn and being able to access your, class's email at that time, this is 2000 when I'm speaking of, gave us different abilities to interact with our professors, our classmates and such. It's a much smaller scale. But if you think about the access of technology, we're talking about HD streaming. There's a multitude of layers of HD streaming now, content that's being produced. Also thinking about the devices that we have, Americans, or I should say the US in general, I think the number of devices that a consumer has is basically an average of 2 or so.
Yeah, 2. 2 phones at that too.
2 phones at that. If you go out now to even Europe and then go out to Asia, that number goes easily up to 4 to 5 devices.
Wow.
So if you think of it from that lens and really question yourself, what are you doing with all those 4 to 5 different devices? That is absolutely going to change your daily behavior in terms of what content or what apps or what different types of lifestyle and even perhaps financial aspects are you looking at to be able to look at multiple devices and technology itself.
Well, for the organizers of this at the Career Society who were worried that I couldn't fill an hour of talking, you don't know me for a living, and for my producers who are always trying to wrap me on time, we are right up against 7 o'clock, so I'd say we did great with time. This was a phenomenal conversation. I feel like we are only missing like a drink in between here. For anyone who watched this and wants to share this with their friends who could not watch this because it's a busy world, I get it. This will be on the careersociety.org website as a YouTube clip. And I encourage everyone who's interested in these issues to visit the website for more events like this. Cathy, you are really a big deal. So thank you for joining us. And for everyone watching this, this was an hour of your time that's worth every second. So I hope everyone gained something good out of this. I certainly did. It was a joy. Thank you all very much.